Welcome to Logistics Unplugged. My name is Brian Blaylock, and I'm your host, and I'm happy to jump in today to all things logistics. So let's pull back the curtain, take a look under the hood, and have a great discussion. And we're going to have a repeat visitor here today. I'm looking at you, Bryce. Bryce Williford, Senior Vice President of 3PL for Blue Grace. Bryce, thank you for being here. This is the market update, and I'm happy to get into it.
It's great to be here. At some point, I think I'm just the regular monthly update, right? As opposed to a repeat visitor. At some point, I'm like
you're the guy.
Guest you can't get rid of or something.
My co-host, Bryce Williford, here today to...
That's too much pressure. I feel like I got to come more prepared in that case.
Oh, geez. Well, listen, speaking of prepared, we got a lot to talk about, but before we do, it just wouldn't be right, based on the feedback that I've gotten from the folks, to not give an alligator update. And for those of you who haven't listened, go back and listen, but to the previous updates. In one of our previous stories, Bryce shared about an alligator who's in the back of the truck. I won't go into much more detail than that, but I will tell you that we made a little side joke, Bryce, about where we thought he might have been before when we both watched a recent Happy Gilmore
referencing an iconic movie that's coming back now with a sequel.
Yeah, it is. As a matter of fact, I'm very excited about that. But unfortunately, and I don't know if you heard this update, Bryce, the actor who is named Morris the alligator actually passed away May 11th and will not be part of the sequel.
Yeah.
So that's a bummer. He was 80 years old. The veterinarian said the cause of death was natural causes, but I'm going to be honest with you. Authorities have gotten in contact with me, and I gave him your name. Just saying.
Listen, I do what customer salespeople do in logistics. It was probably the carrier.
I like it. There you go. Yeah. So just as a little background, and this is a true story, on the little background on Morris the alligator. He was in Interview with the Vampire, Dr. Dolittle 2, Blues Brothers 2000, and the original Happy Gilmore.
Yep.
And a very cool thing, and I think he was also in the back of that truck, just as a 5-Pete there. So anyway, rest in peace, Morris the alligator. Those of you who get a chance, look that up. You might see a nice tweet that Adam Sandler put out about it, which was hilarious. But anyway, that's enough sidetrack for the day. Let's talk market. Let's see what's going on out there, Bryce. I know we refer to this as kind of the news and the weather of our industry. So talk to me a little bit about what you're seeing out there now.
Yeah, no problem. So start with not tariff stuff, and then we'll go to tariff stuff, which is, I feel like every conversation I'm having right now is tariff related. So just, I guess, quickly, since we spoke last, we've been through what we refer to in the market as DOT week or road check week.
Yep.
It occurs every year in May during road check week. There are certain things that are being evaluated for both truck safety and driver safety, and during that, it's a 3-day period. We typically see a pretty good amount of disruption in the industry because drivers are getting stopped more frequently by the DOT to be inspected, being put out of service, and then also many carriers are using that period of time to not have their drivers drive to avoid those situations. And so typically see a dip in capacity, an increase in spot rates during that period, and we saw that this year. If you look at rate trends over the last 4 years, starting in 2022, the winter of 22 going into the summer was the first real steep decline in spot rates coming out of the post-COVID freight boom.
Sure.
So dry van rates and reefer rates were extremely high over the winter, and then started a pretty steep decline. But if you look at that data and you sort of put it on a chart over annual period by week, you see this little bump in the middle of May leading into Memorial Day, which was DOT week, and then the holiday month end as we moved into June, and then rates kind of continued down their slide towards where we are now, and rates have continued to decline year over year this year. They've been down a bit from where they were last year, which I think at the time everybody thought was the floor, and rates popped over DOT week and have stayed elevated over the week since then, going into and through the holiday. They're still elevated this week, but they're basically tracking the same trend as the last 2 years.
Right.
They're slightly lower for dry vans, slightly higher for reefer, higher for flatbed, but a similar spike. And if that continues, if this trend of sort of tracking the market continues, for spot rates this year compared to the last 2 years. We're going to see a little dip as we get into month end. It's going to spike again at month end and through July 4th, and then the rates are going to decline until we get towards peak season. And we'll see what happens, but rates have been tracking kind of year over year trending right now for the better part of this year. That created some chaos in the market, which is where, for being at the sort of the bottom of our freight recession right now, and there's not a ton of activity. That was positive outcome for carriers. Challenging environment for shippers, but we're seeing it bounce back pretty quickly to where it was prior to DOT week from a capacity standpoint, which is that there's capacity that's pretty readily available. We are in the sort of end of phase one, moving into phase two of produce season right now. So Southern Florida, Central Florida produce was shipping very heavily, kind of leading up to the Memorial Day holiday. Now we're seeing North Florida, Southern Georgia, moving into the Carolinas, some of Alabama, where produce is now becoming more prevalent, and South Florida is slowing down. We'll continue to see that through the 4th of July, and as produce season will then sort of move west. And then there's some other seasonalities occurring in Arizona and California where we typically see them right now. But overall, the market still remains very soft. There's not a lot of demand. The impact of tariffs and pull forward of inventory has happened at this point. Right. And I guess kind of switching over to what are we seeing from a tariff standpoint. The tariffs on China specifically, I think that period of time was short enough that while there was a pause in ocean bookings and then a surge as soon as the 90-day reprieve was announced, it wasn't enough of a pause to build up a big enough backup where we're expecting a huge backlog of freight at the ports like we saw during COVID, where ships are parked for 2 weeks at a time off the coast of California. There was a quote from the executive director of the Port of Los Angeles, Gene Soroka, I think it was last week, I saw on FreightWaves where he said, we're not expecting this massive surge of containers, and I attribute that to just that tariff period, the impact of declining or canceled bookings out of China was just not long enough to create something that the ports couldn't absorb. So we'll see what happens, and obviously there's tariff conversations going on now with Europe. There's still ongoing negotiations with the U.S., Mexico, and Canada. The 90-day reprieve is just that; it's 90 days. There's not a long-term deal in place. So as we get closer to the end of that 90-day period, I think there'll be some concern from importers. But as of right now, the market is pretty calm, and there's still capacity that's readily available. Rates are still relatively low. Route guides are still performing well. And I don't expect that to change beyond typical annual seasonality. There's nothing from a demand side standpoint driving market change.
We talked about the impact a little bit of the tariffs, and I think the thing that confuses me the most, Bryce, and maybe you can kind of help folks understand, we can try to respond, we can try to adjust our supply chains, but you have to know what you're adjusting it to, right? So when you talk about developing a nearshoring strategy or any other alternative, friendly nations, whatever you want to call it, we have to know where they're going to land before you can decide to create permanent infrastructure anywhere. Have you started to see some of our partners, our customers, figuring things out in spite of and saying, okay, this is going to be my new strategy because I knew this holds up, and so we're going to do something a little bit different. Is there any of that out there that you can see?
I think some of it was already happening. The impact of the freight boom post-COVID, and when the market started to open back up and people started buying things and people started shipping again, companies started shipping again. Companies learned very quickly that being very far away from your manufacturing was a risk. Right now, maybe it was a risk that needed to be there, but it was a bigger risk than I think a lot of companies anticipated. I think that the concept of diversity in the supply chain and making sure that you have redundancy for critical components, critical goods, was more brought to the forefront than it had been in the past. And so a lot of the trends like nearshoring or diversifying away from one country as your primary supplier, or remanufacturing location was already underway. And the tariff the tariff conversation has only heightened that need for shippers. The conversations we're having, companies that started a heavy push to nearshore 3 or 4 years ago are ahead of the game right now. We're definitely seeing more demand for cross-border freight coming into the U.S. from Mexico. And there's been more manufacturing development done in the U.S. in that time period as well. Some of those facilities are, getting to the point now where they'll come online and they'll be able to provide goods or manufacturing services for their companies that invested in them. And then I think the third thing that we're seeing right now is just a diversification of origin points for suppliers. So if you've been purchasing your materials or components for your goods or doing manufacturing in China, companies are looking at other countries like Vietnam, like the Philippines, like India,
Right.
as an origin point. And look, those countries are going to have tariffs as well. The one thing the administration has definitely made clear is there's going to be tariffs, right?
Sure.
We're gonna do that. And I think it's going to come down to which countries sort of play ball with what the administration wants, and whatever your views on that are. I think that as a corporate entity that is reliant on foreign parties for parts of your supply chain, you're going to have to be prepared for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you and I have had this discussion. It doesn't matter what we think. It matters that we have to have a solution, no matter what the reality on the ground is, and that is what we're all dealing with. And there is no real crystal ball. We can't know all that. But when you talked about that pull ahead of inventory, and I don't know if I snuck this question in or not, Bryce, but what are those inventory levels looking like now? Are we sitting in a good position on inventory for critical products, and is there another push that you think will be necessary or will be coming to kind of resupply those inventories?
Yeah, for the most part, inventory levels are still strong. Companies brought inventory forward and they're selling through that inventory now. But you're hearing a lot about companies raising costs, right? So, Walmart pretty publicly said they're going to raise costs. I just read something that Nike was planning on raising costs. And those are two major brands in the marketplace. They're trusted brands in the marketplace.
Sure.
And if they do that, it remains to be seen. But it hasn't happened yet for many organizations because there was a lot of inventory brought in already. And I think, again, that the fact that the tariff impact from China was short enough that companies may have a gap, but that gap was largely covered by what they pulled forward. Now, if that happens again, if it extends, who knows? But at this point, it appears at least that inventory levels are adequate to cover demand.
Gotcha. And you dipped the toe a little bit, Bryce, in some of the seasonal shipping and some of the produce-driven parts of what's going on in the market right now, which obviously is a big driver to how things move. So that made you step into the deep end of the pool, because a couple of our summertime shipping guests have been required to put out their summer song list.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to give you about a 5-minute warning here as we continue the discussion. No pressure at all. You got to come up with, Bilby, what do you think? Let's make it 3. Your top 3. She's molding it over there. I can see it. Your top 3 summertime tunes. And this time, the good news is, and we know each other a little bit, and I know you're not quite the song guru that maybe some others are, but I know you got a few hiding in there. It's top 3 summertime songs. And I won't require you to sing or dance because you shared with me your love for those 2 events.
Yep.
But we'll dig into that in a minute. So let's find out what those top tunes are. They don't have to be logistics related this time. They don't have to be trucking. So they can just be pure summertime joy. So get ready for those.
All right.
So we talked about what's going on in a little bit and how the effect of the tariffs, the inventory being pulled forward, where we're sitting, the effect of everything that's related to what we have on hand and being able to continue to supply the consumers. And you talked a little bit about cross-border. Is there a differentiation, that's my $5 scribe word for the day, in between the levels of product that are still coming through the southern and northern border? Are you seeing more or less over the last couple of quarters?
That's a great question. I would say that we're seeing more imports coming in from Mexico. I would have to do some research and look at some data to see is that a feeling I have because of the business that we're touching and the conversations I'm having, or is that a trend that we're seeing in the broader market? That sounds like a good segment for one of my market updates that I send out each week. But I would say as a general statement, what I'm seeing is more. There's more import activity coming across the border from Mexico. I think that the initial tariff news was largely about the NAFTA countries, about the U.S. and Canada and Mexico, and that was largely resolved initially before a lot of the news came out about China and the EU and some other countries. And so, that by sort of timing-wise created opportunity for our neighbors to the south and created more opportunity for them to participate in supply chains from an import into the U.S. standpoint. But again, that trend was already occurring, right? Nearshoring was already occurring. It's been a trend that's been going on for a while, and COVID really heightened and highlighted the need for better proximity to your goods,
right? Shorter
supply chains, especially if you're a company that wants to run lean, it wants to run just in time. You can't. The idea that you could count on a set transit time and set sailing schedule from China was suddenly thrown out the window during COVID, and I think that a lot of companies are they might have gone back to that, but there's redundancy they've built in, or they're creating a more diverse strategy for how they get their goods.
Yeah, I agree, and I want to sort of end this part of the discussion with talking about the things that we do feel like we could be optimistic about. And I know that there's always going to be challenges and difficulties. And I said this on someone else's podcast recently, is I'm a big fan of the resiliency of the people, right? So we're going to buy things. We're going to sell things. We're going to get through this. We're going to find ways to continue to excel and continue to make things better. And one of the things I like most about your team, Bryce, is that's the business that you're in, is the make it better business. And so whatever the it is for the customers, we have to figure out a strategy that can help them make that better. And on that optimism tip, when you see some of the things, some of the the industries, new businesses, do you see particular segments where you think there can be some spikes over the next? You can't make this your monthly forecast for this, but if we're talking about longer term, do you see whether it's infrastructure, building construction, or are there certain industries where you see a good future for growth of the economy, but the growth through our lens where we see it in logistics?
Yeah, so I look a lot at manufacturing data as a bellwether for what we're going to see in the domestic freight market. I think that retail sales and consumer spending are sort of sexier numbers and data to look at, but manufacturing is what drives the largest portion of the for-hire truckload market in the U.S. And so, manufacturing expanded in January and February. It declined in March and April. We'll see what happens with the next set of data that comes out for May. But overall, I think there was already a trend towards new construction for manufacturing facilities in the United States occurring with semiconductors, automobiles, some of the things that drive, again, large supply chains and large transportation needs. That was already occurring prior to the current administration, prior to the tariffs that we're seeing now post-COVID. And some of those facilities are now getting to the point where they come online soon and actually start generating jobs and revenue and transportation needs. So I think that's going to continue, and I think we're going to see the impact of that in the freight world. I think we're going to see the impact of that in the consumer world. I think you're going to see the impact of that from a job standpoint, which are all positive things, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
And then, just from where we're at right now, obviously it's summertime, right around the corner. It's here. It's having done the Florida life for a couple of years and then moving away. But living in Arizona now, so
you didn't really hit the winter time.
Experiencing summer, it's hot. It's humid here. It's the first time I've been here since last summer when I walked out of the hotel and was like, "Wow, man, it is it's humid here now." If I had glasses on, they'd fog right up, and it's been we've hit the triple digits in Phoenix already. So there's a whole host of products and things that are in demand for summertime shipping, and whether it's food for barbecues and hot dogs and things like that, or it's beach chairs and beach equipment or outdoor equipment and patio stuff. That's happening now. So we'll see that from a sort of standard annual cycle standpoint. And I tell my kids are just got out of school, and so it's summertime now. And but the reality is they'll be back in school pretty quick, and then we'll see that back to school product boom, which happens every year as well, and be peak season before you know it, Thanksgiving, Christmas, and if we continue to follow this annual cycle, there will be more activity in the economy as we move in through those different seasons.
I like it, and you transitioned us perfectly to the summertime trends: grilling, cooking, being out in the sun, doing things that kind of warm the soul a bit. So now the burden's on you, Bryce. You had time to multitask, think, and talk, and let's see if you're able to do that. Let's hear those top 3 summertime songs.
Well, yeah, you said it. So music, not my. I'd much rather talk about baseball or basketball statistics, or than my favorite hot dog at a baseball stadium that I've been to. But so summertime hits, you got to start with Something Like That by Tim McGraw.
I like it.
It takes me back to living in Chicago, where I spent 14 years when I first heard that song, and it's something that's always on a playlist for me. And right now, you go outside, it's sunny, you hear that beat. I just heard it recently, and that's definitely something that makes me think of summer. Slightly newer song, but still not super new. Jordan Davis, Fishing Spot. Which I don't know that that's quite as big a hit, but I like it. It's on my playlist right now.
That's pretty deep for a non-music guy, Bryce, I got to say.
Yeah. Well, I got to see Jordan Davis twice now in concert. I saw him at Amphitheater in Phoenix with my wife about a year ago, and then he opened for Luke Combs when I saw him in Arizona last year as well.
It's good to see her positive influence on you, Bryce. I like it.
And then my third one, so if I'm not listening to country, the only other music I really listen to, if it's not somebody else choosing, is 90s hip hop. So when I was in high school in California and in the 90s, take it back, different century. My first summer job was working for my high school soccer coach at the Pacific Stock Exchange. I was taking the BART, if you're from the Bay Area.
Yeah.
BART systems, the commuter train.
I'm familiar.
Taking it from Oakland into San Francisco, and summer of '97 when Mace came out with the song "Feels So Good," and that was I don't know if you call him a one-hit wonder, but there weren't a lot of other songs.
I can't think of any others
from Mace, so
that might be accurate.
But that song's always in my playlist as well. It's kind of it stands out because it's mostly country, but that song takes me right back to coming out of the Pacific Stock Exchange, done with the day, like 1-2 o'clock in the afternoon, because we started real early because we were opening and closing with the market, but we were on the West Coast, and then taking the train back across the bay and hanging out with my friends and stuff, for the rest of the day during the summer. So that's my third one.
I like it. That's not a bad list for a non-music guy, Bryce. Yeah. Now I'm going to require you to do some of the hip hop moves to that.
No. Hit me with a taser. That's what it'll look like.
Hey, Bryce, I can't tell you how much I enjoyed this, how much I appreciate you coming on and doing this. It never gets boring.
Yeah.
I appreciate it, and I appreciate so much the audience listening to us. Please continue to do this. Next one will be out next Tuesday. That's a wrap. We'll see you next time.